She drove past them once. She looked down the slope at the tram stop, counted the people waiting, and decided there were not enough. So she drove back to the top of the hill and waited. When she looked again and saw that the crowd had grown, pensioners, workers, a summer morning's ordinary assembly of the living, she put the truck into motion. None of them heard her coming. Hello everyone. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with where you are watching from. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you stories like this one. Now, let us begin. It was the 10th of July, 1973, in Prague, a city of wide tram routes, linden-lined boulevards, and the particular quiet of a state that preferred its citizens not to make too much noise. The morning had come in warm and overcast, the sky a pale, unmarked grey above the 7th district, where the apartment buildings ran in long rows, and the smell of warm tarmac rose from the pavement like something slow and inevitable. It was a Tuesday. People were at their ordinary business, opening shutters, carrying bread home from the bakery, standing at the familiar stops where the trams arrived and departed with mechanical regularity. The city moved as it always moved. The state had seen to that. The citizens of Prague in the summer of 1973 did not know, as a rule, what was coming toward them. This was not unusual. Most people in most cities, at most moments, do not. The linden trees were in flower along Strossmayerovo náměstí. On the slopes of the 7th district caught the morning light precisely as they had the morning before, and the morning before that. A young woman of 22 had rented a truck. She had been planning this for longer than anyone knew. Olga Hepnarová was born on the 30th of June 1951. Her father was a clerk, her mother was a dentist. The family was orderly, respectable, of the middling professional class that the socialist state both required and produced. They lived in Prague. They had expectations. They had routines. Olga had none of these things, or rather she had the forms of them, without the interior that was supposed to fill them. She went to school. She could not speak to her classmates. She sat at the table with her family. She could not speak to her parents either. She would say, years later, in that she had known from a very early age that the world was her enemy. Whether this was born in her, or made in her, by something said, something withheld, some accumulation of small unkindnesses she could never quite name, the record does not resolve. She washed, she dressed, she went to school, she came home, she said nothing. The days repeated. In 1964, when she was 13 years of age, her sister found her unconscious on the floor. She had taken 10 tablets of a mild sedative. She was taken to hospital. She was placed in a psychiatric ward and kept under observation for 1 year. The physician who examined her wrote that she showed marked apathy. He noted a habitual nicotine addiction. He recorded in his clinical assessment that she was suffering from schizophrenia, which Olga told the doctors that her father had beaten her. She said the adult members of her family had treated her without kindness. She said, and the phrase was preserved in the notes, copied into records, and would one day be entered into evidence, that her family had crippled her soul. She was observed. She was examined. She was, in time, discharged. She went home. She went back to school. She grew older. She was not helped. The state offered limited resources to persons of her condition in those years, and what was offered did not reach her. She fell through the gap between what existed and what was needed, as many had before her, as many would after. Nothing more was thought of it. The hatred was not sudden. It had been there from the beginning, she would later say, a low and constant pressure, and something she had grown so accustomed to carrying that she could no longer feel the weight of it as unusual. But it deepened. In the years after hospital, in the years of attempting employment and failing, of returning to rooms alone and finding nothing waiting there, the hatred deepened and clarified until it was less a feeling than a philosophy. She hated her family. She had always hated her family. She hated her colleagues, the people she was made to sit beside in the offices and cab yards where she briefly worked before being dismissed. She hated the citizens of Prague who moved through the streets as though the world were simply there, as though connection were available to anyone who wanted it, as though it were merely a matter of reaching out. She could not reach out. She had tried once or twice and found nothing on the other side. She stopped trying. In 1967, when she was not yet 16, she wrote in a private journal, "I hate people." She followed the declaration with a careful list of her reasons, orderly, systematic, as though she were composing an argument she intended to one day make in court. The journal was kept. It would be placed in evidence. She found work as a driver of heavy goods vehicles. This suited her. She was alone in the cab. She was not required to speak. The hours were her own, within limits. She drove. She returned to her rooms. She did not speak unless spoken to, and she arranged her life so that this happened as seldom as possible. In the weeks before the 10th of July, she sat down and wrote 2 letters. She addressed them to 2 separate Prague newspapers. She composed them with care. One of them read, "I am a loner. Mace a destroyed woman, a woman destroyed by people. I have a choice, to kill myself or to kill others. My verdict is, I, Olga Hepnarová, the victim of your bestiality, sentence you to death." She posted the letters on the 7th of July, 1973. They would not arrive until 2 days after the sentence had been carried out. On the morning of the 10th, she presented herself at a vehicle rental company. She filled in the necessary documents. She paid 260 crowns. The assistant at the counter asked her to complete a test drive before releasing the vehicle. A Prague RN, a medium-sized truck of domestic manufacture, the kind used every day across the city for deliveries and removals. She drove the test route without difficulty. She was composed. She showed no agitation of any kind. The vehicle was inspected and released into her custody. It was a little after 10 o'clock in the morning. She drove toward the 7th district. She had considered other locations. She had considered Wenceslas Square, which she rejected. Too prominent, she judged, and the truck would draw attention before she could position it effectively. She needed a slope. She needed an ordinary tram stop at the foot of it, the kind that collected people naturally, the kind where no one would think to look up. She found her location. She drove past the stop at the foot of the slope and looked at the people waiting there. She counted them, or something like, counted them, assessed them. She judged their number insufficient. She drove back to the top of the hill. She waited. When she looked down again and saw that the crowd had grown, working men and women, and pensioners with their morning bags, the ordinary collected weight of a Tuesday, she drove the truck forward. It gathered speed on the descent. The people at the stop did not move. There was no warning they could have processed in time. The truck struck 25 people. 3 died at the scene. 3 more died before the day was out. 2 further victims succumbed to their injuries in the days that followed. 8 were killed in total. 6 were seriously injured. 6 more received wounds of a lesser severity. The great majority of those struck were between 60 and 79 years of age. The truck stalled. Olga remained in the cab. She did not move from her seat. She sat quite still and waited for the police to arrive. When they came, they asked whether she had fallen asleep. And they asked whether the brakes had failed. She told them she had done it on purpose. She was conveyed to Pankrác Prison in Prague, where she was held on remand and subjected to an extensive program of psychological examination. The findings of that examination would become the most contested element in the legal proceedings that followed. The prison psychologists conducted their assessments over several weeks. They reviewed her history. They interviewed her. They read the letters. They reconstructed, from her own statements, and from the physical evidence of her actions, the sequence of decisions she had made in the days and hours before the 10th of July. Their conclusions were unequivocal. At the time of the commission of the offence, Olga Hepnarová had been fully aware of what she was doing. She had planned it. Then she had communicated her intentions in advance, in writing, addressed to 2 newspapers. She had rejected one location as tactically unsuitable and selected another with deliberate care. She had driven past her chosen target, assessed it as insufficient, withdrawn, and returned when conditions were more favourable to her purpose. These were not the actions of a mind unable to understand the consequences of its conduct. In the opinion of the examining practitioners, she was not suffering from any mental illness that would bear upon her culpability. This finding stood in direct contradiction to the diagnosis entered in her records when she was 13. The physician who had then examined her had written schizophrenia. The discrepancy was noted by all parties. It was not resolved. Olga, for her part, offered no assistance in resolving it, or she told those who questioned her that she was sane. She did not invite mitigation. She did not soften her account. She had known what she was doing. She insisted upon this. She offered it, in fact, as something close to a point of honor. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every single comment, so let us know what you think of this case below. Now, let us continue. The letters were retrieved from the newspapers and placed in evidence. The rental documentation was secured. The testimony of the company assistant confirmed the morning's sequence of events. The route she had taken, the location she had selected, and the fact of her driving past once and returning, all of it was reconstructed from physical evidence and from her own statement, which she did not retract, did not qualify, and did not seek to soften in any way. Charges were formally laid. A date was fixed for trial. The trial opened at the municipal court in Prague in the year 1974. Her defense counsel was a lawyer of experience. He had evidence. He had, in the earlier diagnosis of schizophrenia, a foundation. He had her documented history of hospitalization, her recorded statements to physicians, her years of psychological difficulty, a decade of paper that argued, coherently and in detail, in that the woman now standing before the court had never been entirely in possession of the faculties required for full criminal accountability. She refused to let him use it. She told the court she was sane. She repeated it. She said she had no regrets. When the presiding judge permitted her to make a statement, she did not waste the opportunity. She stood in the dock and she said, "If the society destroys individuals, individuals can destroy the society. I wanted to take my revenge on society, including my family, because they are my enemy. Knowing that I managed to do it, I felt a kind of release and satisfaction." The courtroom recorded this. The jury withdrew. They deliberated. On the 6th of April 1974, they returned, guilty. On all 8 counts of murder, the sentence was death by hanging. Olga stood in the dock and received the sentence. Those present recorded that her expression gave nothing away that could be readily read. She was returned to Pankrác Prison. Her mother mounted an appeal before the Supreme Court of Czechoslovakia. The appeal was rejected. The sentence was confirmed on the 3rd of March 1975. The matter was then referred to the office of the Prime Minister, who declined to exercise clemency. He declined to respond to the petition submitted by Olga's mother. The execution was fixed for the 12th of March 1975. In the weeks before that date, Olga gave an interview. She told the reporter, "I am not afraid of the death sentence. I do accept it." She said it plainly, the way she had always said things, without elaboration, without the careful softening that might have made the listener more comfortable, that might have invited sympathy. She had never invited sympathy. She did not begin now. The courtroom was cleared. On the morning of the 12th of March, 1975, the door of her cell in Pankrác Prison was unlocked. The guard entered. He secured her hands behind her back. He told her it was time to go. She collapsed. The young woman who had told the court she felt no regret, who had told the reporter she accepted the sentence, who had told the doctors she was sane, who had stood in the dock and offered a speech about the revenge of the individual upon a society that had destroyed her. That woman was not present in the cell when the door opened. Or what was present was a person of 23 years who discovered, in the moment it became real, that she did not want to die. She screamed. She wept. She had to be physically lifted and carried down the corridor. She was pleading when they brought her to the gallows. Olga Hepnarová was hanged at Pankrác Prison in Prague on the 12th of March, 1975. She was 23 years, 8 months, and 10 days old. She was the last woman to be executed in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia abolished capital punishment in the decades that followed. The state that had required her to work, to conform, to be a productive citizen, to ask nothing unreasonable of the world around her, that state eventually decided it would no longer kill its prisoners. By then, there was no one left to tell her. The Czech press covered the case in the manner of that time and that system, official, restrained, without sentiment. The letters were reprinted, the verdict was summarized, her courtroom speech was noted in the record. Then the name began to fade. This is what happens. The files remain, the name fades, the city continues, the trams run. In the year 2016, a Czech film was produced, Olga Hepnarová. It was selected for competition at the 66th Berlin International Film Festival. It was seen by audiences in cities Olga had never visited, in a language she would not have understood, by people who had never heard of the 7th district of Prague or the slope above the tram stop at Strossmayerovo náměstí. It was received with critical attention. It was called, in several reviews, a portrait of loneliness. The tram stop is still there. The street runs as it always ran. People stand and wait in the summer mornings, as they always have, not looking up when vehicles pass at the top of the hill. The file remains in the record, bound in dust and silence, and the particular silence of a city that has learned over many years not to ask too many questions of its own history.